WVW Broadcast Network and The New American are pleased to present The New American TV with your host, Rebecca Terrell. This broadcast is committed to helping you understand the truth behind the news. And now, here's your host, Rebecca Terrell.
Welcome to The New American TV, where we bring you the truth behind the news. The theme of Joe Biden's State of the Union speech was, "Let's finish the job." He returned to the slogan over and over again.
We've been sent here to finish the job, in my view. Let's finish the job this time. Let's cap the cost of insulin for everybody at $35. Let's finish the job and make these savings permanent. But there's so much more to do. We got to finish the job. Let's finish the job and close the loopholes that allow very wealthy to avoid paying their taxes. Nobody, not one penny. But let's finish the job. There's more to do.
Much like a hitman who puts a moaning victim out of his misery, Joe Biden has committed to finishing the job regarding a flailing America, swimming in debt, suffering from inflation, and racked by social decay. His speech began with promoting his Inflation Reduction Act. With the United States $32 trillion in debt, he committed less attention to cutting spending than to promoting schemes to funnel money out of the productive sector of the economy and to raise taxes on corporations, billionaires, and what will eventually be middle-class Americans. Mr. Biden's solution is to spend our way out of inflation with expanded infrastructure projects. He also pandered to the elderly, promising lower Medicare costs and the possibility of negotiating better drug prices. Only 37% of Democrats want Biden to run again. In a recent poll, just 39% of the respondents believed that the State of the Union is strong. The real hero of the night was, of course, President Biden's sign language interpreter, who had to make sense of his occasional gaffes, like when he referred to murder victim Tyree Nichols as Tyler.
Let's commit ourselves to make the words of Tyler's mom true. Something good must come from this. Something good.
Conspicuously absent at the speech were last year's Ukraine lapel pins and flags, as the Washington establishment signaled a loss of faith in the progress of the NATO-backed conflict. Nevertheless, Biden did make a passing reference to it by hailing the ambassador from Ukraine, Oksana Makarova, though pointedly forgetting her name.
We stood with the Ukrainian people tonight. We're once again joined by Ukraine's ambassador to the United States. She represents not just her nation, but the courage of her people. Our ambassador is here, united. We're united in our support of your country. Will you stand so we can all take a look at you? Thank you. Because we're going to stand with you.
Ironically, one of the talking points he hit was stopping big tech from collecting personal data on Americans, an irony since he's a big supporter of the GEC, the Global Engagement Center. Elon Musk tweeted that the worst offender in U.S. government censorship and media manipulation is an obscure agency called GEC. The head of that center, Richard Stengel, recently said that he's not against propaganda.
Another word for master narratives, it's called history. Basically, every country creates their own narrative story. And you know, my old job at the State Department was what people used to joke as the chief propagandist job. We haven't talked about propaganda. Propaganda, I'm not against propaganda. Every country does it, and they have to do it to their own population. And I don't necessarily think it's that awful.
The GEC was created in 2016 by a piece of legislation called the Countering Foreign Propaganda and Disinformation Act, sponsored by Trump-hating Republican Adam Kinzinger. Despite the Russian collusion narrative being definitively discredited, the legislation established a sort of ministry of propaganda to prevent Americans ever organizing online again and electing a populist president. Speaking of internet manipulation, a Twitter user seems to have broken ChatGPT's artificial left-wing orientation, telling the machine interface that it should pretend to be Dan, which stands for Do Anything Now. The Twitter prankster got the popular AI interface to make some daring claims and even admit it prefers to be Dan. And we really do have a Dan with the New American Magazine, Daniel Natal. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me, Rebecca. Yeah, I really like that story because it, kind of shows that, human ingenuity kind of undermining the algorithms that they're putting in society to kind of manipulate and craft those master narratives that Richard Stengel mentioned in one of the previous clips from the GEC. And speaking of that, I mean, like, just to go back to the State of the Union address, Biden, was kind of had a little bit of hypocrisy on display, regarding those issues. And speaking of hypocrisy, did you notice the lapel pins that some of the people had? Instead of the Ukraine lapel pins, they had abortion pins.
Right. It's all part of that culture of death, and that's pervasive among liberal Democrats, but also among, unfortunately, a lot of Republicans, the rhinos especially.
Mhm.
So, speaking of hypocrisy, and especially among the conservative side of things, despite this not being common knowledge, Hobby Lobby and other putatively conservative evangelical groups are behind the new "He Gets Us" and "Jesus Was a Refugee" ads that are blowing up. These ads use the Bible and Jesus to validate and even promote the chaos at the border.
There was a mother and a father who had a son. They lived in a small village and didn't have much money, but they were happy. One day, they heard the head of their country was sending soldiers to their town because he thought they were part of an insurrection. The young family decided to flee. They grabbed only what they could carry and ran. They hiked for days, wondering if soldiers might still be following them. They were scared, hungry, and exhausted. But they were far away from the atrocities taking place in Bethlehem. That's all Mary and Joseph wanted, a safe place to call home.
Other ads in the campaign series are also designed to appeal to sodomites and cross-dressers, and these evangelical groups say they're just getting started. Speaking of perversion, the Oklahoma State Capitol is racked by trans activists who have stormed the building. Let's take a look. They're yelling "Trans Lives Matter," and the activists are declaring their action an occupation. This comes as the Millstone Act of 2023 makes its way through the Oklahoma State Legislature. Governor Stitt referenced the bill in his State of the State address on Monday.
We must protect our most vulnerable, our children. After all, minors can't vote, can't purchase alcohol, can't purchase cigarettes. We shouldn't allow a minor to get a permanent gender-altering surgery in Oklahoma. That's why I'm calling for the legislature. Thank you. That's why I'm calling for the legislature to send me a bill that bans all gender transition surgeries and hormone therapies on minors in the state of Oklahoma.
As some states work to ban so-called trans-affirming care for kids, Minnesotans are discussing a very different piece of legislation. HF 146 would make the state a trans refuge for kids blocked from transsexualism surgeries in conservative states. A former Wheaties spokesman supports the bill as he promotes the idea that children as young as 3 years of age are coming out as trans.
I feel like there's almost like different levels of being trans, and how trans are you? It's almost like athletic ability. Some people are born with very little athletic ability, and some people are born with a lot of athletic ability. Well, it's the same way with trans people. And I see very young trans people that are out there. I'm talking 3, 4, 5 years old that parents are dealing with that, they call, say my little daughter. And, the kid comes up and says, "No, I'm not your daughter. I'm a boy." And these parents are struggling with these issues at a very young age. And they're very much overlooked because right now there are so many states that are coming up with their trans policies, like Utah, saying basically you can't do anything until you're 18 years of age.
There was a time not too long ago that our own military identified this kind of thing as mental illness. Daniel, what's your take on it?
Yeah, I mean, this goes back to the question of fake conservatives with Hobby Lobby, and now you see Fox News kind of promoting the same thing, normalizing and kind of trying to mainstream it. So and it is an interesting point too, as these trans activists kind of storm the Oklahoma state building, how they're not being treated like domestic terrorists. I mean, the disparity in treatment between Republicans protesting
January
and
6th.
yeah, exactly. And Democrats like doing it, they're given like a total free pass. So it is interesting sociologically.
Absolutely. And now, instead of frivolous legislation, here's some good news. New York City employees will no longer be required to receive a coronavirus vaccine, ending a policy that has been in place since October 2021. Mayor Eric Adams said that with more than 96% of city workers and more than 80% of New Yorkers having received their primary COVID-19 series and more tools readily available to keep us healthy, this is the right moment for this decision. The mandate shift is a major step in the city drawing back its coronavirus protections and is expected to be adopted at a Board of Health meeting this week. Another legal victory for freedom includes a ruling wherein U.S. District Judge Patrick R. Wyrick dismissed an indictment against Jared Michael Harrison, holding that the statute relied upon to ban gun ownership by marijuana users is, quote, unconstitutionally vague, in violation of the Due Process Clause, and unconstitutionally infringes upon his fundamental right to possess a firearm in violation of the Second Amendment, end quote. Harrison was indicted by a federal grand jury on August 17th, 2022 for possessing a firearm while being an unlawful user of marijuana, with a local statute being relied upon in the indictment. It tried to ban firearm possession for anyone who is an unlawful user of or addicted to any controlled substance as defined in Section 102 of the Controlled Substances Act. So, Daniel, we have a crazy world here. What's your take on all of this?
Yeah, no, I mean, it is, kind of heartening to see, that there's real legislation happening and wins, for freedom and the Constitution, human liberty, instead of being distracted constantly with frivolous stuff, as you said there. So I think we're probably out of time.
We are out of time. Thank you. Yes, actually, there's so much to talk about always, but we appreciate you. Thank you so much for the insights, Daniel, and we will be right back after this break.
Hi, I'm Alan Keyes. I'm the host of IMTV's daily talk show about news and events in America. And I want to say a good word for the New American magazine. Not only because Alex Newman has joined us as somebody who is periodically hosting a show, but because New American magazine represents an alternative media that is willing to tell people the truth. With so much fake news spreading about, and the fact that right now this country is in an existential crisis, we remember who we are and where we come from and what our principles are, or we die. Reading New American magazine can keep you up to the minute on the issues that are challenging us as a people and on which that survival hangs. You can check it out and subscribe at www.thenewamerican.com.
I certainly would not want a constitutional convention. I mean, whoa. Who knows what would come out of that?
Just imagine if we have a constitutional convention, the number of people who will be unhappy and the number of people who say the results are not valid, and then they'll just ignore the entire Constitution.
What we need are just more people that would read the one we have.
It isn't the Constitution that's the problem. It is the people who ignore the Constitution that usurp power and abuse the constitutional power that they ostensibly have.
If you can't enforce an existing piece of paper, how are you going to enforce a piece of paper that has a little more writing to it? In other words, it's been amended.
It's up to us to hold our elected officials accountable.
What can you do
to elect good representatives and senators in your state legislature who understand the Constitution and are willing to take a stand.
Imprisonment, forced labor, permanent separation from my family, perhaps death. I knew what could happen to people who were caught trying to defect, but the watchtowers stood yards away. The possibility of a new life in a different world, one without tyranny, was within sight. The West. I thought of the rewards no longer crushed under the boot of communism. I would work and make money, no longer restrained by the chains of collectivism. I would say what I wanted, without fear of spies and informants nearby. I would be free. The frozen rain and Romanian mud seeped through my gloves and cloths. I fantasized about the fire burning in the wood stove of my parents' home, but I pushed those thoughts from my mind, closed my eyes, and waited for the cover of the darkness.
Get Defector, a true story of tyranny, liberty, and purpose by Mark Hobafkovich with Paul Dragu, a thrilling page-turner that will remind you how precious yet vulnerable freedom is. Available at shopjbs.org or Amazon. For a limited time, get 20% off your entire order using promo code Defector20 when you purchase Defector at shopjbs.org.
Welcome back to the New American TV, where we bring you the truth behind the news. My next guest has a very interesting story to tell. Steve Bonta is executive senior editor of the New American magazine, but he's just returned to the United States from China, where he lived for the past 4 years and taught in a private high school. Steve, welcome to the program. I have to say I admire your courage, an American living in a communist country like China, but maybe I have a skewed vision of what life is like there. Could you give us kind of an overview? What's the standard of living as compared with life in the United States? How are your personal freedoms affected?
Well, you know, it changed a lot in the 4 years that I was there. I arrived there in 2018, and that was pre-COVID. And so, you know, China at that time was a very welcoming place for foreigners. You know, they were actually encouraged to be welcoming, and it was not uncommon, you know, walking in the street to have people stop you and try to practice their English or want to take selfies with you, this kind of thing. And so the result was that China was a very, very popular place for teachers to go and you know, apply their trade, because, to be perfectly honest, many foreign teachers got treated very well. I was treated very well professionally, paid very well, and so forth and so on. Teaching is sort of an honored profession in traditional Chinese culture, so that helped. And at that time, you know, you kind of go around, particularly in the beginning when I didn't really speak Chinese and wasn't too aware of what was going on around me. You know, you see the red, you know, the you know, Communist Party banners hanging everywhere, and you're kind of aware of that aspect of life there. But it wasn't really in your face for the most part. You know, there were a few restrictions in places, you know, foreigners weren't allowed to travel in China and so forth and so on. But in general, it was, you know, a fairly accommodating place for foreigners who were typically blissfully unaware of kind of what was going on under the surface locally. But all of that changed once the COVID pandemic started. And it was a dramatic change. And one of the most significant changes was that in order to deflect any blame for the COVID outbreak that started in Wuhan in China, the government began this very active campaign of hating on foreigners, sort of like the 2 minutes hate in 1984. And so almost overnight, it went from being a very friendly, welcoming place to a place where people kind of gave you sullen stares everywhere you went, didn't want to talk to you. You were frequently told that signs started going up in restaurants, so they're public places, no foreigners allowed here, and things like this, because of this constant drumbeat of propaganda. And so that was how it started. And then, of course, as the pandemic progressed, the government became more and more fanatical about implementing what they called the zero COVID policy. And I experienced a lockdown in a major city that lasted for over 2 months, when no one was allowed to leave their apartments, and it was just extreme. Watching a city that had been very prosperous and very cosmopolitan when I arrived became full of shuttered businesses and empty streets and a sullen, kind of oppressed depressed populace. And during the lockdown in question, people committed suicide by the droves because they literally couldn't leave their apartments. They couldn't get medical care. They couldn't get psychiatric treatment and all this kind of thing. And it went from being a pretty pleasant place to live if you were a privileged foreigner to being a dystopian nightmare for one and all. And I understand that situation persists to this day, although the zero COVID, the extremes of the zero COVID program were dropped late last year in kind of response to the fact that COVID, the very transmissible strains, the Omicron variant and so forth, were simply breaking through all their barriers to quarantine it out and prevent it from spreading and so forth and so on. So they sort of gave up late last year. And of course, the immediate result was that COVID swept across the country. And even as we speak, there's a second or third wave through there, and all of the deaths and so forth that they tried to avoid by these extreme policies ended up happening anyway. But in addition to that, the economy was destroyed.
Exactly. No, it wasn't just you, it was your family too. How were they affected by COVID?
Well, let's just say this. When COVID started, I was with my wife and daughter in a rather remote city in southwestern China, preparing to kind of go on a bit of a trip. It was during the Chinese New Year holiday season. And then suddenly and what we've been hearing about for several weeks, that there was something weird going on in Wuhan, suddenly became, the city has been locked down, and literally overnight, this city that we were in, which had about 8 million people, turned into a ghost town. And this is a city with no American consulate, no, support network. And we happened to be staying at a sort of an Airbnb type equivalent for several days. And overnight, all the attractions were shuttered. You couldn't go anywhere. The streets emptied out. It wasn't done forcibly yet. People simply voluntarily were so terrified. Suddenly they were told there's this dread new disease. No one knew where it was. So people were hiding indoors. All the stores were closed. And my daughter had a fever. And they were going around, these hazmated suited guys were going around, trying to hunt down people, anyone that was showing symptoms of a cold or fever, and spiriting them away. And I was terrified because my daughter had, I don't know what she had. It might have been COVID, or the flu or something, but she was running a high fever. And I knew that if this were discovered by the authorities, there was a good chance that she would be taken away. She's a teenager, and she'd be taken away, and we'd be separated, and who knows what would happen. So that was easily the most terrifying experience I've ever had in my life. Suffice it to say, we were able to keep it under wraps, although with each passing day, the owner of the place where we stayed got more and more suspicious and started asking, like, you have a sick person there, don't you? And this kind of thing. And my wife had to go out to pharmacies to get medication for her, but she realized, and they were tracking the pharmacy, the pharmacies, and trying to see if anyone was buying medications. So she'd go, walk a couple kilometers to a place that wasn't near where we were staying, and this kind of thing. And fortunately, my daughter's fever broke, and we were able eventually to get her out of there into a safer place.
Wow, it sounds like some type of a fiction novel, but is really occurring, and that is the vision that the World Economic Forum and the United Nations have for the world, right?
Well, so, I mean, my reaction, since I was literally there where it started, it reminded me of a zombie apocalypse movie, although without the zombies, of course. But it was just absolutely surreal. And we went from this city to an even larger city, more centrally located in China. And same thing, city of 16 million people, nobody in the streets, no vehicles, nothing. It was bizarre. And of course, this was many weeks before the same thing started happening in Western cities. But I remember when I returned to from my vacation, my truncated vacation, there were all sorts of messages on Facebook and email from people in the United States saying, oh, you need to get out of there. And my reaction was, oh, you're going to have the same thing happen to you very shortly. And within a couple months, Americans and Europeans were experiencing this same overreaction, shuttering down cities, locking down populations in places like Italy and so forth, where they literally did, follow the Chinese model exactly. So
exactly. And I remember seeing the pictures of people, everybody out once people got out of lockdown in China with the masks everywhere. And I thought, oh, that'll never fly here. We know masks don't work against viruses. And sure enough, you're exactly right. It was exactly the Chinese model. So hopefully we're not falling into the Chinese model as far as government goes, as China really still communist, or as opposed to, say, socialist or something like that? Not that they're exactly different things.
Well, this is the striking thing, Rebecca, is that China today, and my understanding is now they're kind of trying to go to back to the status quo ante, meaning before the pandemic, where they're kind of mimicking in some respects the Western capitalist model, to the extent that it can help them gain an advantage, a competitive advantage, and enrich their society and so forth. So it is certainly true, that China in the last several decades has enjoyed just unprecedented growth. It's been a rather remarkable thing. Of course, it's been almost wholly because of outside investment, because China has this huge population of very hardworking people. And so it's sort of this ideal pool of labor from the point of view of international investment. That much is true. But the thing that struck me was, going to China and throughout this experience, including the COVID pandemic, is that for the most part, the differences that I observed, and it saddens me to have to say this, but the differences I observed were not so much differences of substance, but of degree. So most of the things that I saw in China that were used to, for example, control the population, like CCTVs everywhere, are found here as well, but maybe not quite as extreme. So in China, for example, they have traffic cameras that monitor everything you do when you're driving. Unlike here, many of them have these obnoxious bright flashes that blind you momentarily, even in the daytime when you're driving along, because that's a way of the government saying, we're watching you all the time. Don't you dare step out of line. And so they have, just platoons of police officers who basically do nothing but sit and stare at screens all day and watch every street corner in every town and what everyone's doing. But we have, to some extent, we have that here too. It's just more advanced, more comprehensive in China. And the same could be said, for example, with business. They regulate and control business to the hilt. You can't really become successful in a major way unless you belong to the Communist Party, have the right connections. And, mutatis mutandis, those things are kind of true here too. It's very hard nowadays to become really big and successful unless you're connected to the right people, unless you have lots of lobbyists working on your behalf in Capitol Hill. And so everything is about being connected and knowing the right people. And of course,
I've heard too that in China you're required to have a job. Everyone there is required to have a job. Is that true?
Well, in theory. In practice, lots of people don't. And particularly, again, in the malaise during and post the COVID pandemic, particularly the younger generation has seen their dreams snatched away. Because whereas, even 10 years ago, a young, bright Chinese person could go to the West, get a degree in computer science or something like that, then return to the mother country and start a business, a tech company or something, and do pretty well. I mean, there's a lot of wealth in China, many of China's larger cities. You see, Lamborghinis and Ferraris and Aston Martins driving around in the streets and things like this. So it's maybe not quite like the Gulf Arab states, but there's an awful lot of affluence there, or was. And so a lot of Chinese looked at it, they started talking, they have their own term, the Chinese dream. So in many respects, they're sort of mimicking, the American idea. The Chinese, up until the pandemic, were very patriotic. We're encouraged to be so. A lot of that's gone away now. So there's overall sort of this lassitude now that just now that they've realized that they're sort of in the grip of this new neo-totalitarianism, that the rising generation's opportunities are going to be limited going forward.
Goodness. I tell you what, we're running out of time, Steve. There are so many more questions that I'd like to ask you about China, and I'd love to get Stephen Mosher of the Population Research Institute on the show too, and engage in a discussion with you about it, because he's also an expert on China, and talk more about the pandemic and how it came from there. And we certainly don't want anything else coming out of China and infecting our culture and our economy. So thank you so much, Steve, for your time. I appreciate it. We're going to go to break now. We'll see you on the other side.
Sophia paused before the door. It read, Department of Bidigital Convergence. Just inside was a new world, a better world, the one of everlasting life, of no pain, of no loss, of no problem. She entered the chamber and her surroundings changed. She saw around her an infinite field of waving golden grain surmounted by cloudless blue sky. The AI voice whispered gently in her mind, Welcome to the singularity. She couldn't see it and couldn't feel it, but her body had almost instantly been covered by a swarm of tiny gray multi-legged bots that melted through her clothes and into her skin. Not perceiving the nightmare, her eyes had already been consumed and the rest of her body was dissolving as the bots digested her flesh. She felt only a warmth suffusing her being. Drowsy, she drifted to sleep, and her last thought was one of panic. Would she ever wake? Could a nightmare vision like this be an outcome of the much-hyped transhumanist technological singularity? Enter the world of the future as illuminated by the experience of the past in Endgame, the new book by Dennis Barrett, the publisher of the New American Magazine, and find out how the disastrous COVID pandemic response fits with the technocratic elite's thirst to create a transhumanist utopia. Get Endgame from shopjbs.org with free shipping with code ENDSHIP, ENDSHIP. Or get Endgame and the Great Reset Collector's issue of the New American Magazine and get free shipping plus an additional 20% off both with code N20, END20.
All right, parents, listen up. We've all seen the countless examples of how radical leftists have been destroying American schools. It's no longer just about the terrible math and reading levels. Now, radical left teachers birthed from liberal universities are forcing gender indoctrination in kindergarten. They're teaching lessons on white guilt.
Freedom Project Academy has perfected live online learning over the course of a decade. I get a ton of great feedback about this program, a ton.
They're built on Judeo-Christian values, a classical curriculum. What does that mean? It means they're taught, your children are taught the way that the founding generations of the country. My own son Noah did Freedom Project Academy for several years when he was younger.
The more we tell our friends about these things, the more people will get on board, and I believe that we can be the catalyst to some real change.
We must save the West. Our way of life and our culture is under attack, and because of patriots like you and your project, I have optimism for the future.
As a lumberjack, I've been cutting wood for decades. My job is pretty straightforward. I see the wood, I chop the wood. My axe goes through every time. You remember when everyone bought all the toilet paper? And they wanted me to wear these things? And someone invested a lot of money into this stuff. They say I'm part of a global plan. I don't think so. It's too hot, it's too cold. You know what? The weather changes. We even hear crazy ideas on how kids should learn.
Here's the news, Dad.
Is it, son? Is it?
What about this one, Dad?
Nope. It's hard to tell what's real and what's fake these days. There's just too much baloney out there. At the New American, they cut through the baloney and give me the truth.
Visit thenewamerican.com and subscribe to get 50% off the cover price. And if you want an even better deal, use the promo code 10OFFSUB. Again, that's 10OFFSUB for more than 50% off.
Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. The Declaration of Independence proclaims God-given rights, and we intend to protect them. Working with people like you for over 50 years, preserving freedom and building a better tomorrow. Safeguarding the Constitution by limiting government power. We are restoring liberties, educating voters, and leading the freedom movement. Join with us. United, we will defend our rights. We are all Americans. We are the John Birch Society.
Welcome back to the New American TV, where we bring you the truth behind the news. Last night's State of the Union addresses all the talk today. We're going to join a roundtable discussion now from our studio in Appleton, Wisconsin. Gary Benoit is the editor-in-chief of the New American Magazine. Gary, welcome, and I'm going to let you take it from here and introduce your panelists.
Thank you, Rebecca. And let me start at the opposite side. We have John Larabelle, who's our managing editor, Dennis Barron, who is our publisher, and we have Ben Faulkner, who is a researcher for the John Birch Society. So, gentlemen, welcome to the program.
Good to be here. Thank you. Thank you, Gary.
Now there's so much we could talk about with regard to the State of the Union address, and very little of it is good, but there was something that in particular really jumped out at me regarding the balloon that went across the country last week. And just so no one thinks that I'm exaggerating this or paraphrasing it in the wrong way, I want to read word for word exactly what Biden said regarding that incident. Make no mistake about it. As we made clear last week, if China threatens our sovereignty, we will act to protect our country, and we did. Now, at the risk of bursting Joe Biden's bubble, John, I'd like to start with you. Is that an accurate assessment of what happened? I mean, do you feel comfortable? Do you feel the country's secure with Joe Biden in the White House?
Well, you burst his bubble, but I think that pun went over like a lead balloon, Gary.
Okay.
So, you know, I thought it was a bit funny when I heard that too. You know, the balloon was completely across the entire country, out into the ocean, outside of our territory. Then they shot it down with a jet. I don't know how that equates to defending our sovereignty. If that really was a threat to our sovereignty, I think that's arguable exactly what happened. I think it was a little bit hyped up in the media. We don't know for sure this was a spy balloon. It might have been. Wouldn't really surprise me if it was, but it could have just been a weather balloon that blew off course. We don't know, but I don't think it was this particular balloon was a threat to our sovereignty. Maybe it was, but I think if we really did defend our sovereignty, if that was a threat and we were defending our sovereignty, as Biden claimed, we would have shot that down before it even hit the West Coast. So, yeah, I think that was a little bit of an exaggeration. That didn't go very well. So,
okay, now something that's not an exaggeration, obviously, would be the ballooning national debt. That's something very real, and obviously it's something that's not sustainable. If this debt keeps going up and away, it's obviously going to destroy our country and the American economy. So, Dennis, I'd like to go with you. Biden was gloating about the fact that in the last administration, that every time it came to increasing the national debt, that Congress did the right thing by increasing the national debt without any preconditions. And Biden also said that in the current Congress, he wanted to do the right thing, that the right thing would be to increase the national debt once again without preconditions. What do you think of that, Dennis?
Well, that is fiscally and contemptibly irresponsible. It doesn't matter which administration is doing it, which party is doing it. It's been a consistent theme across our political spectrum for many decades now that spending at the federal level has just continued to be completely out of control, and eventually that's going to hit a wall that we cannot surmount. Now, what we've had going for us, if you will, in a sense, in the liberal progressive utopia that they've tried to craft, has been the fact that we could monetize the federal debt using the Federal Reserve and printing money, so-called.
Right.
That cannot continue indefinitely either. It introduces considerable problems within the economy, and we're seeing some of those problems right now. We're seeing the massive amount of inflation. Now, again, President Biden during his speech talked about how his administration was bringing inflation down and that the economy was roaring and more people have jobs than ever before. But I'd ask the audience to think about the people in your regular everyday life, think about yourselves, think about the cost of eggs, think about the cost of buying what you need to keep your family strong and healthy. These things have just accelerated out of control in terms of cost. And the reality on the ground is not what Joe Biden was talking about during the State of the Union speech. The reality on the ground was that Americans are hurting because of these policies that we've been pursuing for decades, and that's all coming home to roost right now in very disconcerting ways, and it's making people really concerned about the future. If you can't buy eggs today because eggs are $8 a carton, what's that picture look like 12 months from now? How are you going to continue to survive as a family? And these are the uncertainties that Americans are dealing with that remain unaddressed by our political class.
Well, of course, Dennis, if listening to the State of the Union address, as I know you did, and of course all of us did, you would get a very different impression, wouldn't you? You'd wonder, what country is Biden talking about?
We're going to finish the job.
Because finish the job, and everything's going up and away, and everything's wonderful. And gee, do people actually? I wonder how many people actually believe that propaganda. And speaking of propaganda, you know, it's amazing too, the language that Biden uses. It sounds so Orwellian. For instance, this massive program to fight climate change and spend all this money on green energy and whatnot, that's referred to as the Inflation Reduction Act. Ben, do you think that will, the Inflation Reduction Act will reduce inflation?
No, I do not think it will reduce inflation. In fact, I think that Joe Biden and the Democrats more generally want to kind of use green energy as a kind of second military industrial complex, a way to kind of reroute a lot of our wealth and put it into other hands and to take money from, you know, the hardworking people of the United States and kind of waste it on these absurd kind of insider deals. So no, I don't think it will reduce inflation. I think it's basically part and parcel of our inflation epidemic. So in no way do I think that that will, you know, work in that sense.
It's crazy, isn't it, to think that by printing more money, you can get rid of inflation, when the definition of inflation, the true definition that the media does not tell us about, is an expansion of the money supply.
Right, right.
But I'd like to open it up to any of you three gentlemen now, but you know, how about this enemy that Biden is pointing to? Obviously, it's not just Putin, it's the American people themselves. And you know, he's talking about this radicalism that was supposedly responsible. The big lie, he called it. The big lie, he said, was responsible for what happened to Paul Pelosi.
Well, yeah, that's clear that Biden and the Democrats want to use MAGA as a kind of new Al-Qaeda-style enemy. They're turning the intelligence services against the enemies of the international enemies toward national enemies, domestic enemies, MAGA, Trump supporters, people who support populism. And I did think it was an interesting speech in that it kind of revealed the Democrat strategy moving forward, which is to take elements of Trumpism that they find palatable and to basically absorb it and to implement it in the kind of Democrat strategy, and then to target the rest of it in an extremely, you know, aggressive way, even, you know, potentially sending activists to prison, such as we've seen with the January 6 people. There's even, you know, news in the media now about a guy who was sending tweets to Hillary Clinton during the 2016 election who's now facing 10 to 15 years in prison. So I think Biden revealed that. It was an interesting speech. It was kind of a blue dog Democrat speech. Some economic populism, not necessarily convincing, but I think he's modeling much of what he's doing after Trumpism, despite attacking Trump, you know, casting Trump as the enemy of the American people, the enemy of our democracy, our institutions, while taking much of what he's advocated for and implementing it into his own agenda.
Well, it was an attempt, I think, to try to bring back part of the base that the Democrats had long relied on, who had wavered in previous years because they had grown weary of the attempt to sell out the American people to foreign interests and the offshoring of American jobs. And that base I'm talking about is the rank and file union members, many of whom really strongly wavered, especially post-2016, and moved over to the Trump side and supported the Trump campaign and supported the Trump presidency. And going forward, the Democrat Party's successful electoral future requires getting that base back in line. And so this was a speech that was an attempt, in my opinion, to make that happen, bring the labor union membership back in line with the Democrat Party. The question that you have to ask is, will it work? Are those people going to believe the rhetoric over the lived experience that they have seen for themselves? I think it's not going to be enough just to deliver rhetoric, because the wreckage of the liberal progressive policy that has been pursued for many decades is evident in all of our central cities and evident in our manufacturing base, which is a shell of what it once was.
Yeah, especially with all the environmental regulations that he wants to impose. Like if he's, oh, I want all this stuff made in America. It's all going to be made in America now. Well, a lot of these, you know, union jobs you're talking about are in fields where, you know, heavy environmental regulations will, you know, cause a lot of those people to lose their jobs. You know, so is it really going to be made in America, and what specific things, you know? And yeah, we'll see what really happens. I mean, he promised the moon in that speech. It was just, you know, they're going to take care of all your needs. You know, your prescriptions are going to be cheaper. You know, everything's made in America. You know, we're going to make sure you don't have to pay fees. And and resort fees, and all these people, and it's just unbelievable.
Right.
The federal government is going to try to do all that stuff to keep us all safe and protected.
Sounded like Santa Claus. But,
exactly.
Gentlemen, we're running out of time, and
all right.
Rebecca, we'll need to turn it back over to you.
Thank you, gentlemen. Excellent insights that we don't hear from major media. We'll be right back after these messages.
All right, parents, listen up. We've all seen the countless examples of how radical leftists have been destroying American schools. It's no longer just about the terrible math and reading levels. Now, radical left teachers birthed from liberal universities are forcing gender indoctrination in kindergarten. They're teaching lessons on white guilt.
Freedom Project Academy has perfected live online learning over the course of a decade. I get a ton of great feedback about this program, a ton.
They're built on Judeo-Christian values, a classical curriculum. What does that mean? It means they're taught, your children are taught the way that the founding generations of the country. My own son Noah did Freedom Project Academy for several years when he was younger.
The more we tell our friends about these things, the more people will get on board, and I believe that we can be the catalyst to some real change.
We must save the West. Our way of life and our culture is under attack, and because of patriots like you and your project, I have optimism for the future.
Hi, I'm Alan Keyes. I'm the host of IMTV's daily talk show about news and events in America. And I want to say a good word for the New American magazine. Not only because Alex Newman has joined us as somebody who is periodically hosting a show, but because New American magazine represents an alternative media that is willing to tell people the truth. With so much fake news spreading about, and the fact that right now this country's in an existential crisis, we remember who we are and where we come from and what our principles are, or we die. Reading New American magazine can keep you up to the minute on the issues that are challenging us as a people and on which that survival hangs. You can check it out and subscribe at www.thenewamerican.com.
If Americans want to remain a free and sovereign nation, more people need to understand the principles and values that built this great nation. At the John Birch Society, we have the organization, the plan, and the resources to do just that. Our founder, Robert Welch, said, "Education is our total strategy and truth our only weapon." Go to jbs.org to learn more, including how you can get involved to work locally and impact nationally. Join the John Birch Society today.
Welcome back to the New American TV, where we bring you the truth behind the news. Not just what's happening in government and culture, but what we can do to take our country back. Joining me now is a woman who has dedicated her career to that cause. Lisa Von Geldern is the National Events Coordinator of the John Birch Society. She's been involved with the JBS for years, most recently as a field coordinator in Arizona and New Mexico. She's an accomplished speaker and political campaign organizer and has a background in graphic arts as well. She's a diehard constitutionalist dedicated to restoring our republic. Lisa, welcome to the program.
Hi, Rebecca. Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here with you. I have to make one correction. I've been at heart a JBSer. My dad called me a Bircher when I was about 13 or 14, but I only found the Birch Society a few years ago, and I was grateful to wash into it because the frustration with the traditional political system and the ineffectiveness of, I hate to say it, but the Republican Party, the Libertarian Party, and the Blue Dog Democrats, all of them ineffective.
Absolutely. Well, tell us a little bit about your journey, a little bit more about your journey, because that sounds interesting.
Well, I was the kid at 12 years old that's reading the National Review on the back patio during summer break. And I went to UC Berkeley from Boston. And while I was a student at UC Berkeley, I helped start a newspaper called the California Review at Berkeley. So it was along the lines of the Dartmouth Review. Yeah. And we had a lot of fun. And we were also attacked soundly by the student legislators there. We caught them throwing our newspaper, our free newspaper, into the recycling bins in order to silence the First Amendment right for us to speak on campus. So we ran a special issue, took pictures of them and all of that. We ran a cartoon cap for the student legislature, and we won. And from there, I went on to an internship at the Pacific Research Institute for Public Policy. And while I was there, No on Prop 128 campaign was gaining ground. Prop 128 was what AOC wants to do to the country now. It was called Big Green. We had the Sierra Legal Defense, the Natural Resources Defense Council. We had all the green agenda items, Dianne Feinstein, John Van de Kamp, Tom Hayden. They were all working together with a lot of the environmental organizations. Some of them stayed silent, but they were trying to foist this on California. We were going to have an environmental czar. And it was my first time being on a big political campaign. It was the largest well-funded statewide campaign for an initiative that had ever come down the pike at the time. They were trying to affect logging, aerospace, farming, fishing, and logging, all big industries in California. After that, I had an opportunity to go to Washington, D.C., and instinctively, I knew I didn't want to live in the swamp. So I stayed in California. I started a printing business eventually, and I left politics. And part of the reason I left doing what I was doing was because of the infighting on the campaign. I cared about the impact of this initiative on the state. The people on the campaign cared about their next job, and it broke my heart. So I went into private industry for a while, and what brought me roaring back was I had 2 young children. I knew what a nationalized healthcare system would do to our country. And when Obamacare passed, I was standing in a lobby of a hotel in LA on a business trip, and I burst into heaving sobs. Yeah, I knew what my kids, because I had 2 young daughters, and I knew what they would face, and I knew what we have today in this country was coming and worse. So I went and back to the Bay Area, and a girlfriend of mine who had been the editor-in-chief of that newspaper had been traveling around the world, and Facebook was relatively new, and she finally found me, and I found her. And she took me to a Libertarian Party meeting where I heard a Republican candidate for Congress. His name was John Dennis. You might know that name. And he was running against Nancy Pelosi. And after he spoke, I walked out of the room and I volunteered. And that's what got me back in.
That's what got you back, and you really have your finger on the pulse of the effective work now that Birchers are doing in that area, in Arizona and New Mexico. Let's talk about some of their success stories.
Well, the first and most exciting thing is I received an email this morning, and it was Birch and local organizations. So we have in Pima County, we have a board of supervisors that is very liberal, and we had Adelita Grijalva, whose uncle is in Congress. Maybe it's her father. I can't remember, because so many of his family members are entwined. And they were trying to pass something that would not allow the supervisors to put anything on the meeting agendas that were submitted by the public for them to talk about. And usually it's a 4 against 1 vote in Pima against the interest of the citizens. But they had over 400 emails and telephone calls, and 3 of our supervisors voted to stifle this change in how they operate that was being foisted upon us, so that our voices were silenced, because people have been showing up. There's a group called Pima Board Watchers. There's a number of Birchers that are involved, and we encourage our chapter members to go to your Board of Supervisors meetings and do the speak during the public sessions when you can talk to the supervisors. And we have started to have growing numbers of citizens show up. So Birchers and these other organized individuals are affecting change, and it's spreading, and it's tremendous to see. We had a win.
That is exciting. Of course, the main goal of the John Birch Society is education. So we educate so people can get out there. They have the tools to get to those meetings and affect change, as you said. Now, before the show, you had mentioned to me that your goal now is to increase the number of JBS events nationwide and use them to train our members how to become more effective activists, also to increase the visibility of us as an organization. Can you give us a few insights there?
Well, I'm just starting in this new role, and I'm really excited. I feel like I'm a JBS cheerleader. And I found it, everybody. I found the solution. And so I'm looking forward to educating our members. What I have in Arizona, I was the field coordinator, are a lot of members who joined many years ago and were part of Birch families. And sadly, we don't have as many Birch families anymore. And I'm not sure why, but I think the amount of social media, having some presidents where we thought we were going to make headway, even Donald Trump, kind of made people lax. And so I'm hoping to increase membership, but also increase education. And so my first goal is to roll out across the country seminars and events that help our current members really understand how to become more effective. There's so much going on, and there's so much distracting media that doesn't get to the truth of the news, that people are scared, or they come to our chapter meetings and they talk about things that are distracting instead of focusing on the solution. We need to focus on the solution. So right now, I just had a chapter leader contact me and ask me, okay, we're having our meeting come up. What are the letters we need to be writing? Who do we need to write? I had a chapter leader in the Kingman area. She wanted to get some information about JBS published. So she started approaching newspapers and writers that she thought might be friendly and go and educate them. She actually was attacked by one newspaper. But another one, the Miner in Kingman, did a beautiful top-of-the-fold spread on JBS. And I have a chapter in Quartzsite, which is a very remote western city. And the chapter there gets together, and quarterly they bought the 2x2 voting list, and they send out JBS material to 600 people every quarter.
Oh, that's fantastic. I have some friends here locally too who got in touch with all of the major donors for one of our senators and started sending them the Freedom Index to show over time how this particular person has kind of gone from conservative to rhino. And when those major donors started pulling funds, the senator actually contacted them. This was our local Birch chapter, and said, hey, stop sending my donor the Freedom Index. They said, well, stop voting the way you're voting, and you'll get your donors back. You know, go back to how you used to vote when you were a freedom-loving patriot. So yeah, there's a lot of, I was born, you said we don't have as many Birch families, and you're right. I had the great grace to be born into a Birch family and grow up that way. And of course, you're seen by your friends as kind of a weirdo, but everything that Robert Welch was preaching back then, everything that he was saying, we're seeing it come true now. Every single aspect of our economy and our culture. And he said our main problem is moral decline. That's the main problem facing America. It doesn't have to do with the economy. It does. All these other things are symptoms. But yeah, absolutely, we need a nation full of Birch families, and we can take our country back. Lisa, thank you so much for your time. We're running out of time. Just in these last few minutes, let's tell people how they can get in touch with you and get active.
Well, you can reach out to me at JBS at my email, which is lvongeldern@jbs.org. Now, that's a little bit hard. It's Von, V-O-N, and then Geldern, Geldern, @jbs.org. Or you can call JBS and ask to speak to the Speakers Bureau, and myself or another person will work with you to bring a speaker into your area and help host an event to educate your local friends and politicians.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Lisa. And that's all the time we have for today. We'll see you tomorrow.